Good morning. Thank you all for being here and joining us for the Boston University Institute for Sustainable Energy talk today for the Energy of the Future webinar. This is Women Leading the Charge in Energy Storage to Advance Renewable and EV Growth. My name is Emily Ryan. I'm an Associate Director of the ISE and an Associate Professor of Mechanical Engineering and Material Science Engineering here at BU. We would like to thank the Northeast Clean Energy Council for supporting our entire series, as well as the U.S. Energy Storage Association for partnering with us on today's event. A warm welcome to their members joining us today. Our BU sponsors include my faculty home here at BU, the College of Engineering and the Division of Material Science and Engineering, in addition to the student-run BU Energy and Sustainability Club. Thank you all for your support. So to give you a quick introduction to the Institute for Sustainable Energy and our research, we are an interdisciplinary university-wide center dedicated to advancing the energy and water systems of the future. We help business leaders, energy providers, financial markets, and policymakers to develop and implement equitable and effective sustainability strategies. All of the ISE's research is available on our website at bu.edu/ISE. So I'm excited to be moderating this panel today, as it's an area of my research and also a very important topic as we look to advance climate change and sustainability policies. I'm thrilled to have experts here on both the research and the industry side of the problem, and I hope to have a very lively discussion today about where energy storage needs to go. So as we start off, I'm going to give a quick introduction of each of the panelists, and then I'm going to have them give a roughly 10-minute talk on what they see as important areas and where they're looking at in terms of energy storage. So with us today, we have Paulie Shaw, who's head of policy and communications at +Power. Paulie Shaw has 28 years of experience in 28 years of experience in energy and climate policy and communications in the US and China. Over the past 15 years, Paulie's teams at leading renewable energy manufacturers and developers have helped win widespread regulatory and legislative policies that created vibrant US energy storage, solar, and wind markets. We also have Jacqueline Derosa, who's Vice President of Battery Energy Storage Systems at Ameresco. Jacqueline's role is to strategically lead and drive energy storage project opportunities for Ameresco. This includes defining new energy storage market opportunities, developing the business plan for storage-related projects, and growing the deep technical and business teams. We also have Kelsey Hadsell. She is currently an assistant professor of mechanical engineering at Vanderbilt University and is moving on to Princeton University to join the Andlinger Center for Energy and the Environment this summer. Congratulations to her. Her group focuses on solid state energy storage and conversion systems, as well as thermal energy storage for long duration energy storage. And finally, we have Iryna Zenyuk, who is an associate professor in chemical and biomolecular engineering at the University of California, Irvine, and she also serves as an associate director of the National Fuel Cell Center at UCI. Her group works on decarbonization of energy and power generation sectors through design and implementation of electrochemical technologies, such as fuel cells, electrolyzers, and batteries. So I want to thank them all for being here today. I'm very excited to have them. As I just said, the agenda will include 10-minute presentations from each of our panelists, followed by a discussion session. We are happy to take questions from the audience. If you can please use the webinar Q&A option to share your questions with our panelists at any point today. We will bring them up and address them as we go along. So with that, we're ready to get started with the presentations. And we will start with Paulie Shaw. Will start us off. Paulie?
Hi, good morning, everybody. I am the fairly new head of policy and communications at +Power. I'm going to give you a quick introduction to +Power and what we do, and then move into market trends for stationary storage and some of the things that are driving those. But first, let me just say it's really nice to be back at Boston University, where I spent some time before I ultimately ended at Tufts. So a shout out to all the jumbos, if there are any in the audience as well. In fact, I even played on Boston women's rugby team for a while way back when too. So it's nice to be back in the community. I guess as I think about overall thoughts for this type of a panel, I would say I'm now working for a company and working on projects that I dreamed about as a student years ago. These projects of ours and our peers are enabling the next generation of renewable energy. It's the way we get beyond 50% renewable energy penetration towards 100%. So when I think about the great academic brainpower that's in this audience today, I hope I and my colleagues on this panel can seed ideas of what's needed next so that we can all make our climate goals a reality. I'm going to screen share for a quick second, and I'm going to show you a quick presentation, very short. This is, by the way, a rendering, a draft of our project that's underway in Oahu, in Hawaii. I'm sorry that I can't share with you any project images for our New England projects just yet. So who is Plus Power? We are a leader in very large standalone transmission connected battery energy storage. We're formed in 2018 by seasoned developers from other companies. We're in over a dozen states, almost every ISO. We have proprietary intellectual property to site, build, and operate these projects, and a really robust pipeline. In fact, two of our projects are what we think are the two largest standalone battery storage projects in the nation, in Hawaii and now in Maine. And we've got a deep safety ethos. So when you think about it, what we do is we develop flexible, fast build, critical grid infrastructure that serve dynamic, changing energy market needs. And we develop tailored approaches that maximize the value for each market's unique operating and regulatory conditions. So amongst our announced projects here on the left side that you can see, we've got, as I said, what we think is the fourth biggest energy storage project in the world on Oahu, which is the Kapolei energy storage project, 185 megawatts, 565 megawatt hours. We've done two projects in Texas, 100 megawatts, 1 hour systems. And now we are very excited to announce two projects in New England. The Crosstown project near Gorham, Maine is 175 megawatts, 350 megawatt hours. And the Cranberry Point project near Carver, Massachusetts, 150 megawatts, 300 megawatt hours. Those two projects just cleared in the forward capacity market auction in February at ISO New England, winning 7-year capacity contracts. After investing in New England for several years, it is really exciting to publicly introduce ourselves, our projects, and the value that they can bring to the communities. So what's going on with the markets? Right now, stationary storage has about 3 gigawatts installed. The Energy Storage Association has a goal of 100 gigawatts by 2030. You're seeing unprecedented growth over the last 2 years because storage serves many different needs, sometimes even switching services during the course of a day to serve different needs. It is that versatile and flexible. And if you look at the numbers, look at these Wood Mackenzie numbers. You're going from 3.5 gigawatts per year in 2020. That was already 200% year-on-year growth. To now, Wood Mackenzie estimates 7.8 gigawatts in 2025. 75% of that will be front of the meter energy storage. Over the course of the years ahead, you're going to see longer term duration moving into the markets as well. And if you look as well, look at these numbers and slopes, put a value on that market. Wood Mackenzie estimates 7.6 billion per year in 2025. That's 4x 2020. Why? Because you've got a number of stakeholders, customers, utilities, grid operators, generators, policymakers, beginning to understand the flexibility of energy storage and the many different services that it can provide, and beginning to value it and seek it out. And when you think about the services, battery energy storage can do capacity, it can do load shifting, it can do congestion, it can do a range of grid services, fast frequency response, black start, because that is near instantaneous dispatchability, voltage support, reactive power support. You're just seeing a great demand beginning to happen, and this is a great time to get into energy storage. By the way, did I mention Plus Power is hiring like crazy? If you're an engineer, come look at our website. So you do have some policy structures that are still needed, and we'll get into this in the Q&A, but I really want to highlight the need for the federal investment tax credit for energy storage, despite these amazing numbers. The reason why we need a federal a federal storage investment tax credit, akin to what had the ITCs that had spurred solar and wind, is because that will make energy storage deployed ubiquitously across America where the grids need storage most. When you think about that, that means that storage can be deployed into more disadvantaged communities or communities where fossils are retiring and so on. And by the way, thank you, Maine Senator Collins, for being a co-sponsor of the Energy Storage Tax Incentive Deployment Act, one of two vehicles that are live that are in Congress to debate the passage of the investment tax credit. On the supply side, and I bet my colleagues are going to get into this a lot more, Bloomberg New Energy Finance is expecting 10x demand over the next decade for battery energy storage for both stationary and EV use. And 90% of that by 2030 will be for EV use. So you've got some near-term supply constraints beginning to materialize. You've got, I heard a great webinar by the Energy Storage Association. If you're not a member, you should join them right now. They did a webinar 2 weeks ago on the supply chain, and Julie Blunden and Midali Gupta from BNEF were discussing the 94 gigafactories being built in China, only 4 in the US. There's a great push right now in Washington for domestic supply chain to be able to make these batteries in America to fulfill both EVs and storage. So I guess what I'm going to stop it there and just hand this back to my colleagues so that we can move to Q&A. There's a lot to discuss where we need some help on policy, on research, engineering, and so on. And thanks very much for your time.
Thank you so much, Paulie. And now I'll ask Jackie to give her overview, please. Thank you.
So hello, and again, thank you so much for the opportunity to participate today. Thank you, Emily, and thank you to the Boston University Institute for Sustainability. It's an honor to be here with experts, women experts, which we don't always see all on the same panel. So thank you. I'd like to briefly describe who Ameresco is. Ameresco is an independent energy services provider, and we're publicly traded. We've been in business for over 20 years. We've implemented over $7 billion in energy projects with nearly 300 megawatts of clean baseload energy generation and about 400 megawatts of solar PV. And many know Ameresco as an energy efficiency company, as an ESCO business, but our business has really expanded over the past couple of decades. So we've become much broader. We're now a well-known leader in the landfill gas to electricity market, as well as with renewable natural gas. Some cool stuff. We're moving into the hydrogen space, and we've been actively involved in energy storage really since the beginning, but some of our energy storage efforts have been really quite creative because we've been in the microgrid space with the federal government. So we've learned quite a bit about energy storage for the multiple use applications that it can provide. And that's one of the reasons why I joined Ameresco a couple of years ago. We're doing some really neat stuff, and so it gives me an opportunity to kind of move into the next stage of what's happening in the market. Our business model at Ameresco is flexible. We can own our assets. We can provide EPC services, so meaning engineering, procurement, and construction. We can do energy service performance contracting, leasing. We're technology agnostic, so we try to find the right technology for the right project. So it's a cool place, very flexible place to work, and I'm thrilled to be here and to be able to do what I'm doing. And so that leads me to what I'll be talking about for the next few minutes. So energy storage, I would say I'm an evangelist, and like Paulie, I'm on the board for the National Energy Storage Association and was one of the earlier, worked for customized energy solutions for many years. I can see some of my colleagues are on this call, but really kind of been in front of the energy storage development, scheduling it in the wholesale markets, and always kind of looking for what's next. Today, my contribution is to talk about energy storage as it applies to resiliency. So Ameresco, as I mentioned, has done some very cool projects in the microgrid space. In particular, we have some very large, complex microgrid solutions for the federal government. Many of you might have heard about Paris Island. And energy storage is really, advanced energy storage is really a game changer when it comes to resiliency and microgrids. I actually live in California. I'm from the East Coast. But in California here, public safety power shutoffs are for fire safety are a reality and something that we experience quite frequently during fire season. So even though it's windy way, where we live or in the distance, our transmission lines will have to be shut down for fire safety, meaning that the load can be turned off at the substation and, we're without power for, sometimes up to 72 hours. I get that resiliency issues certainly don't impact just California. Of course, I'm originally from the East Coast, as I mentioned, and I will never forget the impact that Hurricane Sandy had on my family, including my mother, who was in her late 80s at the time and had to go without electricity for 3 weeks or so. And she would say, never in her lifetime would she have imagined that something like that would have happened. So what's fascinating to me is that with energy storage and new software technologies, the price has come down, and we really do have the technology to island from the grid. And I'll talk a bit about what those changes are. But advanced energy storage really is the game changer in the microgrid space. With storage now, we can seamlessly island from the grid. Storage can provide the necessary cold load pickup and black start capability and other reliability services when, a hybrid resource or a microgrid is islanded. And as Paulie was mentioning, the multiple use applications of energy storage, when a microgrid is not islanded and it's blue sky operations, that resource, especially the energy storage, can participate in the larger market and in the wholesale market. And also with energy storage, we can enable optimization so that we can ensure that we have the cleanest solution during an outage or even during blue sky operations and market participation. I'm very fortunate to be able to be working on a project that is a community microgrid, something that probably would have been unheard of until very recently. So this is where the microgrid solution is not behind a retail meter, but it's within the community. It's in front of the meter, and it'll serve the community load, both residential and commercial load when islanded. And this project, which I can't really mention yet because it's still under development, but this project is in Southern California, and it's really very cool. So during blue sky operations, the resource, which will be then modeled in the network model for the ISO, will be a hybrid resource and be able to participate in the wholesale market. And I really, been working in this space for so long, so I'm thrilled that we're finally turning a corner and that these opportunities are starting to pop up. So working in this space too, I've seen a lot of variations in how a microgrid solution can be developed. It's still very new, and some of the control systems are centralized, meaning that the architecture is really kind of at a higher level, whereas some now are what's called distributed architecture, where there's basically pre-programmed solutions on each of the distributed resources within the microgrid. And some of these new solutions are modular as well, meaning that you can easily reconfigure the microgrid. So if you had to add electric vehicle load, for example, basically it's a plug and play. So you can add new resources to that microgrid solution. It's very new, but I would say by doing it this way, it's becoming cost effective. And that's the key, that's the game changer here. Microgrids historically are always thought of, it's a very expensive solution, but not anymore. Now the costs have come down because of energy storage prices coming down and also because of the software capabilities. So the point is, though, that it is tricky and that we're all coming up the learning curve and that not all solutions are going to be the same. Some maybe will provide a sequencing of events and an optimization of resources during an outage, and others might not. And some, depending if you're working within a utility, an investor-owned utility, they're going to have very strict cyber requirements and safety standards. And all of that needs to be considered. But I would say the technology does exist, and I'm very, very eager for the rules to match the technology changes to enable greater microgrid development. And as Paulie mentioned, not to sound like a broken record, but there are many barriers still, maybe less for grid scale standalone storage, because we have new market designs that are mandated and being implemented. However, when you get into the microgrid space, there becomes a lot of issues that still have to be resolved. There's operational, financial, for example, we need to find ways to have the ability to cross public right-of-ways. Interconnection requirements need to be streamlined. We need safety standards that need to be updated for new ways of conducting business. I mentioned the new types of controller operations. And we need to look at the impact of existing standby charges and how to value resiliency. That always comes up. So the rules really need to be clear for the provision of these services into the larger grid as well. As I mentioned, the community microgrid project that I'm working on will also be a wholesale resource. So just like any new emerging technology, a microgrid, whether it's behind a retail meter or if it's one that I mentioned in the community, it's a resource that's a combination of load, generation, and software, and it deserves to be treated on a level playing field with other types of resources, and the market designs need to be modified. So fortunately, a lot of these changes are happening in California. We're in the third track of a proceeding called the Microgrid proceeding at the Public Utilities Commission. And, we're seeing tremendous change here that I guarantee this will be happening, throughout the country. And really, it's a cool time to be in this space. And I'll turn it back over to you, Emily. I know I probably went over my 10 minutes. I get very enthusiastic about this topic. It's a cool space to be in. So thank you again for the opportunity.
Thank you so much, Jackie. And you did perfectly well with your timing. No, that was great. So now the shift, I said this panel is made up of industry and researchers, and we're gonna shift the perspectives to the research side for the next two. And I'm going to ask Kelsey to give her overview for about 10 minutes.
So it's really great to be here. As Emily mentioned, my name is Kelsey Hadsell. I'm currently an assistant professor at Vanderbilt, but making the move to Princeton very shortly. And so my group primarily works in energy storage systems, both on the thermal and battery side. And there's a lot of really great work in batteries, and people are really excited about the lithium ion battery. And probably most people in the audience are familiar with their relationship with portable electronics and your dependencies on these portable devices. And just, I guess now almost 2 years ago, the lithium ion battery was awarded the Nobel Prize, which is really exciting as someone who studies battery systems. And just over my lifetime, we went from having 1 or 2 batteries, in your home to having like half a dozen within arm's reach. And so we've seen the widespread of deployment of batteries, and that's not going away. But as Paulie and Jacqueline mentioned, there's quite a diversity of needs in terms of energy storage across multiple scales, and electric vehicles is one, as well as grid energy storage. And there's quite different needs in terms of designing energy storage systems depending on what scale you are. Most notably, as we go to grid energy storage, the running joke within the battery community is if you want to make a battery for grid energy storage, you need to make it dirt cheap. You literally need to make it out of dirt, just for that to be a practical device. So over the last 4 years, my group has primarily been working on new chemistries and new batteries for electric vehicles. Electric vehicles, when you think about, this is really consumer driven, electric vehicles work and they work well. But a lot of consumers are psychologically encumbered by what they're used to in how you utilize a gasoline vehicle. And that's how far I can drive on a single charge, which we refer to as energy density of a vehicle or battery system, and how quickly can I fill up once I get to my filling station, which is a metric in battery systems known as power density. And so when we're thinking about designing new battery systems, in particular for electric vehicles, we have to be cognizant of these performance metrics. How quickly can I charge my battery? Can we make it similar to how long it would take to fill up a gasoline vehicle? Possibly. And then driving range, how far can I drive? Again, most people are not driving, surprisingly, 400 miles per day even, or even per trip, but people can't get over, that is a psychological thing. If I want to drive 400 miles, can I? And so my group has been looking at some emerging technologies, and this might, I don't know how broad this audience is, but I just wanted to kind of give the history of the battery. The first battery that existed used lithium metal and a cathode material that was awarded the Nobel Prize. This did not work because lithium metal can degrade very quickly. And so the Nobel Prize was really given to the innovation which paired three different materials, namely the carbon anode, a porous separator with a liquid electrolyte, and a cathode. And this innovation was is most of the batteries that we use today, was innovated in the early 1990s. And this Model S utilized a graphite anode and can get around 200 miles per charge. Right now, I'm highlighting kind of the innovations that Tesla has made over the last decade or so, but a lot of other players have contributed to the space. Most recently, most of the innovations Tesla has made has been driving this distance, the duration, up quite a bit. And by the process, the pathway to that is materials. So changing the anode to silicon, so this material can store much more charge. But the holy grail still is, how can we get to lithium metal? It has the lowest chemical potential or thermodynamic potential, and so we can get to higher energy densities. And the biggest challenge with lithium metal and for transportation is safety, safety, safety. This is just highlighting, probably, hopefully no one in the audience has been a witness to a battery explosion, but it's well known that batteries are flammable. And as we go to electrification of transportation, coming up with safe batteries is paramount, in tandem with energy density and power density, or range and charge rate. And so recently, the big direction is going toward lithium metal again, so we can, get to 400 miles per charge. And the pathway to do that is to remove all liquids. Most liquids in a battery are the electrolyte, which moves the ion. In the case of lithium, it's lithium ions back and forth. But moving ions instead through a solid medium known as a solid electrolyte. Solid electrolytes are very promising, but as you can imagine, moving an ion through a liquid is quite easy, and moving a ion through a solid requires a lot of material science. So let's skip this. Okay. And so my group primarily focuses on the materials and what I like to call material systems challenges. How can I put new materials into batteries, and what's the pathway to scalability of these new materials? Theoretically, again, moving toward lithium metal, which doesn't really exist in practice now, would be a significant improvement over the current energy density of a battery, 2 to 4 times. And most people who have been in the airport, probably not recently, you see everyone gravitating toward those few chargers that exist, or those few plugs in the wall, and everyone wants their devices, whether it be vehicles or portable electronics, to last longer. And so solid state batteries presents that opportunities, but there's a lot of chemical degradation mechanisms that my group studies using a suite of different techniques. And it really is potentially non-trivial to add new materials to a battery from the mechanistic point of view. But there was an allusion to this just a second ago. But the biggest challenge with electrification of vehicles is scale. I think Paulie mentioned this. We're going to experience basically an order of magnitude from 100 gigawatt hours to 1,000 gigawatt hours in batteries needed to be able to electrify transportation. And so that means gigafactories. And this is a little bit dated, but these are just the plans for gigafactories in Europe. And so we need to make a lot of batteries, and we need to make them at scales that we haven't yet achieved. And so that's one of the biggest limitations, I think, with integrating new battery chemistries, is keeping pace with the scale that batteries are being made and are projected to be made over the next decade. And so there's many steps to manufacturing. And this is just a highlight of, I'm not going to go into too much detail, but generally we use roll-to-roll manufacturing processes where you coat a material onto a substrate. We stack these batteries are examples of layered material systems, and then we stack and assemble these devices. And so one of the largest challenges with solid state batteries is that we don't know how to make them, nor are they anywhere near the scale that they need to be at for electric vehicles. And I'm going to skip this slide and jump to this just to end this right here. But when we're thinking about new materials, we have to be considering the processing strategies. And right now, what I've highlighted in just this figure is kind of where the state of the art is for manufacturing, or the projected state of the art is for solid state batteries. As you can imagine, the faster that we can process materials and get to those giga scales is going to lead to smaller footprints in terms of plants, lower operating costs. And so there's a lot of exciting work in materials, but we do need to consider the manufacturing speed. Alternatively, new battery architectures also present a pathway to overcoming manufacturing speed, but that is hotly debated. And just to end kind of my little intro here, battery recycling is huge for electric vehicles. That's something that is a pretty hot topic now in battery systems, and having battery recycling in battery manufacturing plants is going to be necessary. And so we're excited about solid state batteries, so that your battery can be charged, can last twice as long. Most realistically, these new material systems will be in higher value applications at first, and that's like portable electronics, your watches, your devices that can deal with higher costs. And so that's all. I'm going to kind of turn it over from that point of view, but this just gives an overview of where we are in terms of materials and batteries right now.
Thank you so much, Kelsey. That was great. And finally, last but definitely not least, we're going to ask Iryna to give us a little bit of a view of her outlook.
First of all, I would like to thank Emily for organizing this wonderful panel, and I'm pretty excited to be here with Paulie, Jacqueline, and Kelsey, and all of you in the audience to talk about energy storage. So I'm gonna shift gears a little bit from batteries and towards something different, so bear with me. So first of all, let me introduce a little bit about University of California, Irvine. We are located in California, and if you've been to UC Irvine, we are one of the kind of most beautiful campuses of the University of California system. We are public school. We have about 40,000 students, and we are located in the closest proximity to some of the best beaches in the United States. This is the outline of our campus, and you can see the center of the campus. That's where kind of this circular park is, and close to the park we have the oldest buildings. And here, that's where we're located. We are National Fuel Cell Research Center, and we are right at the middle of the campus. We are also have a new institute called Horiba Institute for Mobility Connectivity, and it's relevant because this institute will present research topics in field of vehicle mobility, vehicle connectivity, vehicle to vehicle, vehicle to grid, all the hot topics that we need essentially to advance electrification of vehicles. So we are, as I mentioned, public university. We are also sometimes ranked a #1 cool school. I'm pretty excited to be part of this university. I've been here for close to 3 years. Before then, I was a faculty at Tufts University in Boston area. So I'm quite familiar with Boston University as well. So just to give you an overview of what my research projects are, we work on fundamentals. This is kind of the fundamental, the kind of foundation of all the applied research lays in the fundamentals. So we work with a lot of mass transport, heat transfer, porous media, reaction kinetics, electrochemistry overall. So I consider myself electrochemical engineer. And we extend these fundamentals into applications of fuel cells, electrolyzers, and batteries. So we heard a lot about batteries, but not as much today about fuel cells and electrolyzers. Those are electrochemical devices that either convert electricity into hydrogen, which is a fuel, or you can take hydrogen and convert it back to electricity, and that's another reverse process. So Kelsey already mentioned the generation 0 batteries that use lithium metal, and that's what happens. Lithium metal is so reactive that you get to grow this dendrite, and as they pierce through the separator, they short the battery, and that's where you can have all kinds of fires and degradation, things like that. So here we also kind of acknowledge our partners and our funding agencies, and they are listed here. In terms of what I want to talk to you about briefly is about hydrogen societies. So what is hydrogen? So hydrogen can be used as a fuel and as an energy storage fuel. So you can take excess electricity, renewable electricity from the grid, and instead of storing it in the battery, that's what we heard today from the other 3 panelists, you can actually store it, convert it through electrolyzer and store it in hydrogen. And why hydrogen? Because if you think of, we are all kind of used to natural gas. The only disadvantage of natural gas is that when you burn it, it produces CO2. So it's not it's not net zero emission gas. But however, hydrogen does not have CO2 in it. So if you burn hydrogen, it does not produce CO2, produce some other things. But in case of electrochemical, you convert hydrogen very cleanly in electrochemical process in a fuel cell car, for example. So you can take hydrogen, convert it to electricity and drive a fuel cell vehicle, and the emissions will be 0. You can use hydrogen in the various other industrial applications, such as metal refining, ammonia production. It's a major feedstock to produce ammonia, which consumes a large amount of our electricity today. And the advantages is that it does not produce any greenhouse gas emissions, and we have existing natural gas infrastructure. So as long as we can deploy hydrogen in existing natural gas infrastructure and store it in salt caverns, for example, we can be all set to create such a hydrogen society. It first was defined in 2016, and essentially a society where hydrogen is used as secondary energy, and it accounts for about 20% of all energy consumption. So look at it. So it's 20%. We're not talking about 80%. Large portion of market will be batteries, and it makes sense. And I'll talk about this in the next few slides. So just to give you a few examples where hydrogen can be pretty great as a fuel for converting energy and storing energy. First of all is buildings. So we still rely heavily on natural gas for space heating. And as we mentioned, burning natural gas produces CO2 emissions. So if we can substitute natural gas with hydrogen, we can transform our building operation to net 0 greenhouse gas emissions. And we don't need new infrastructure. Hydrogen is very compatible with natural gas pipelines. Transportation. So currently, decarbonization of transportation sector is a big goal, specifically here in California. We want to be net zero emissions by 2045. So majority of cars will have batteries. Those will be battery electric vehicles, but small portion of them, such as heavy duty trucks, class 8 trucks, medium duty trucks, railways, shipping, these heavy duty applications, they'll be very difficult to decarbonize with batteries because of their either heavy load or their long duration that they have to go. And industrial processes. So hydrogen serves as a feedstock into industrial processes such as cement production, steel production, ammonia production. And it's quite visually impossible to decarbonize those sectors without changing to green hydrogen, so-called hydrogen produced without CO2 emissions. Current process includes steam methane reforming. That's how we make our hydrogen. I'll talk about it in the next slides, but essentially industrial processes is one of the major applications for hydrogen. Backup power of off-grid power. I think Paulie talked about power shutdown events, or Jackie, if power shutdown events, PS events here in California. And what do we do when we have the grid of the grid power not available? We turn to backup power generators, and those are mostly run currently on diesel. And again, we again faced with CO2 emissions. So what can we do if we can substitute those with hydrogen and power data centers, hospitals, military bases, etc., with hydrogen? That can be a pretty good solution. In terms of power systems, essentially hydrogen has very quick response time. So those are electrolyzers that use electricity to generate hydrogen. They can really match wild, variable, and intermittent supply, wind and solar. Their response time is on millisecond degree. So this is really fast, instantaneous. And we can convert hydrogen back to power using fuel cells. So here you see some projections for 2030, 2050. This is what is the hydrogen share of final energy demand will be in million metric tons. So you see kind of a regular projection, optimistic projection. So you can see an optimistic projection, we can have 63 million metric ton of hydrogen shared for the final energy demand, which is, you can see majority of it is either transportation, either residential, commercial building, or also industry. Why hydrogen? Let's look at the gravimetric energy density. So this is energy you can store per unit mass. So this is one of the really important metrics, because if you think, for example, of aviation, to fly the plane, you really need a light fuel, right? And that's where hydrogen shines. It's 3 times more energy dense that currently is jet fuel or diesel. The problem with hydrogen that is volumetrically is not really volumetrically dense. It means you need larger storage vessels. So if you were to fly the airplane on hydrogen, you just need to redesign the plane so it can accommodate larger type of fuselage. As I mentioned, 99% hydrogen is still produced with fossil fuels, so in steam methane reforming process, where you have byproduct CO2. So you can also use it to carbon capture and store it, essentially. Only 1% produced from electrolysis. We want this number to increase to produce green hydrogen. Currently, prices are still high. If you produce hydrogen with wind electrolysis, for example, $6. Department of Energy goal is to have $2 per kilogram of hydrogen. You can think of energy content of 1 kilogram of hydrogen is almost equivalent to 1 gallon of gasoline. So if you reach $2 per kilogram goal with green hydrogen, that's where we will see much larger deployment. Currently, we can use steam methane reforming with carbon capture and storage to reach this type of goal. So we have existing infrastructure, as I mentioned, from natural gas pipelines to, you can also take hydrogen and compress it and store it in liquid form and transport it via trucks. This is more, or ships. This is more desirable over long distance. Over short distances, you can just compress it as a gas, transport through trucks. But the best way to transport it is to use natural gas pipelines. Currently, we don't have regulation, don't have policy yet to approve even 5% injection of hydrogen into natural gas pipelines. And this is a big flexibility, because if you look into Europe, Europe does have regulation to some of the countries inject 100% of hydrogen into natural gas pipelines. And hydrogen can be used as a feedstock, as I mentioned. It's essential for ammonia, methanol production, essential in the Haber-Bosch process for ammonia. It's also, you can make synthetic fuels with hydrogen, and it's a really clean fuel. You can also transport electricity through the transmission lines, and then put electrolyzer in the end use, and that's where you can generate hydrogen locally. And just to give you a few examples, why am I talking about hydrogen now? Historically, Japan invested heavily into hydrogen. They don't have natural resources, and it made sense for them to have hydrogen society. China invested 32 billion, Japan 80 billion, and now European Union came up with a COVID energy recovery plan, and part of it is to have more than $30 billion spent over 7 years to build this type of hydrogen economy. Germany is one of the leading countries. They will invest their own 9 billion euros, 7 billion euros for Germany, 2 billion for other countries, because Germany does not have much of wind and solar, so they will rely on export of the renewable energy from other countries. And we want to build at least 6 gigawatt of clean hydrogen electrolyzers in European Union. Hydrogen in US is a little bit behind. We have a new administration that's just coming now and really also promoting decarbonization strategies, and hydrogen will have to be part of that portfolio, especially for long duration storage, for heavy duty applications, for industrial applications as well. I guess our newspapers read enough news from Europe to try to figure out what's going on, why hydrogen has such a boom now. And New York Times visited our center, published the story in November 11th, 2020. They interviewed us, and they also featured our hydrogen refueling station at the University of California, Irvine. And just to give you a perspective, we are a 20-year-old center, National Fuel Cell Research Center. A lot of you know Professor Jack Brower. He's the director of the center. I'm associate director of the center. We were the first one to implement power to gas demonstration, where we use 60 kilowatt electrolyzers to inject hydrogen into our microgrid. UCI has very efficient, a very kind of popular microgrid, and it worked. This project worked for quite a few years. We also run the first of the most used refueling stations for fuel cell vehicles. There are around 10,000 fuel cell vehicles currently in the United States. Majority of them are in California. We also operate a fleet of electric buses on campus, and one of them is a fuel cell bus. And this is just 2 more slides to wrap up my talk. Where do we see hydrogen in terms of transportation? Mostly in the heavy duty, medium duty and heavy duty implementation. That's where we will need otherwise large batteries, and this will severely reduce payload of the, for example, Class 8 truck. They also refueling time for hydrogen is 5 minutes, and California is already building significant infrastructure of hydrogen refueling station for both light duty fleet and heavy duty vehicles. And actually the experience driving fuel cell cars is very similar to driving internal combustion engine car. And lastly, I just want to, I was really excited to hear a few days ago that SoCalGas, which is major utility here in the California, it put a pledge to decarbonization by 2045, essentially aligning their goals with California goals. And they essentially pledged to also a significant investment into hydrogen economy. And so this is kind of the brochure that they issued a few days ago, the CEO Scott Brewery and President Marion Brown. So I'm pretty excited to be in this panel and pretty excited to share and discuss this type of topics. Thank you.
Thank you all for your wonderful overviews of your thoughts and input. And I like the diversity of thought. That was the goal for this, where you get the industry side looking more at the markets, maybe being the driver, whereas the research might be the materials and the technology. So at this point, what we're going to do is open up for discussion for the rest of the time. We have some topics that I plan to cover, but I am also very happy to take questions from the audience, and I've already seen some great questions coming in. If you feel like asking a question, feel free to drop it into the Q&A, and we'll try and integrate it into our discussion. So I'm going to start off with some of the questions I have prepared, and they kind of roll into some of the questions we've seen coming in. But after all of this conversation, I'm curious as to what you all, the panelists, feel is the major challenges impeding growth of storage. And I think Paulie gave some great numbers at the beginning, showing how the market is growing, I think Iryna at the end here gave a good argument against, well, not against, but for more diversification perhaps of storage technologies. So maybe I'll start back at Paulie. What are your thoughts on some of the major challenges that are really impeding the growth that we want in terms of storage?
What you heard today is a lot of change happening very fast. You've got changing technologies and chemistries, you've got changing rules and a better appreciation of safety provisions that are, for example, all the work that the Energy Storage Association has been doing with the National Fire Protection Association over the years to come up with rules for energy storage. There's a lot of change, and therefore there's a lot of need for education, which, thank you, Emily. This is the type of webinar, these and others like this help to keep explaining a very fast, dynamic universe. And I think some of the challenges that we run into for stationary large storage are clearly not having markets defined or valuing storage yet to price out where storage can do the most good for the grid. You've got system prices coming down for better energy storage, but it doesn't yet pencil out everywhere. And you need market rules to give a very effective price signal to compensate for the reliability and risk mitigation values that storage provides. And I was regulatory staff at the California Public Utility Commission years ago. I feel very much for my regulatory peers across the country who are trying to grapple with how to use storage, how to properly value it, and compensate for its very different services. And when I think about what's happening in the energy space, we're going from a binary world to a world of multiplicity. We used to have to deal with energy regulations around products that were binary, either power, brown or green, was producing or it's not. Energy efficiency is working or it's not. And the game-changing thing about energy storage is that it's got this multiplicity of services and approaches, sometimes that can be used in the course of a single day, differing services. And trying to figure out correct market rules is really, really complex. So, and at the RTO level and FERC level, with fossils retiring, we're moving into a new reality of how to use energy storage in the organized markets as well. So I think the biggest barrier is not having the markets defined to value and compensate storage effectively. And there's other things like, interconnection queue reform or transmission reform to be able to use storage to enable the next generation of renewable energy. We really need to be, as a community, defining rules for the market that are looking ahead for where the hockey puck is going to be over the next 10 years of services, and valuing flexibility, reliability, and resilience, those technologies that can provide those services to the market. Jackie, do you have other thoughts, or the other colleagues? I think I ran on a bit.
That's fine. Jackie, do you have anything to add to that? And don't forget you're muted.
Thank you for asking, Paulie, and thank you, Emily. I think it all also translates into the contract. So having been in the regulatory space for so long, and now being on the business side and just figuring out how to translate what the rules are and how to make that into a contract. And there's still just a lot of things where the customer doesn't really know, and we don't really know. We're still learning. For example, even a grid scale battery storage project, right? Say it has, you make some assumption about how many cycles per year it's going to have and what the throughput would be. Well, what if it exceeds that? Well, then what? Then you have to formulate some payment to, accommodate that, the additional amount of cycles, and some type of augmentation. All this stuff needs to be thought through. It gets very complicated. There's also a lot of issues around safety. There's a lot of issues around decommissioning now. So, I mean, it's not fully defined, I would say, having come from working in other technologies. I started back in the day in coal and gas, moved to wind, then solar. Storage is still, we're still refining it, the market design, but we're also still, figuring out the business rules. We're still trying to figure out the financeability. It's not fully there yet. I mean, it is, but it isn't. And it will be. So I don't know if that adds anything, but just to give you a feel for what it's like doing business in this space.
I think it definitely does, but the answer you both gave is really on that business side of how the markets are developing. And kind of almost the same question to Kelsey, but I'll throw in a little bit of what I've seen from some of the questions coming in. From the technology side, with the exponential growth that's needed or wanted in batteries, and there was a couple of questions along this line of, can we do it with the lithium supplies, or do we need to look at other technologies? And would some of these newer technologies, solid state or lithium metal, help alleviate some of those problems with exacerbating our supply chain in terms of lithium and other critical materials?
I think people are pretty optimistic that we have, like, the lithium supply chain is always going to be an issue, but in the advent of recycling, I think generally people are again, cautiously optimistic that the lithium for electric vehicles, we have enough. But when you think about lithium for the grid, I think that that's like night and day in terms of supply. So I think that there is a need for diverse, going beyond electrochemical systems for the grid. Although, you'll talk to a lot of like emerging startups like Forum Energy, and people think that everything is being benchmarked to batteries at the grid right now, and whether that's an effective comparison or not is again hotly debated. But I think one of the things from the research point of view that we're starting to look at for all technologies is, how do we move away from benchmarking new technologies versus what I describe as equilibrium conditions, where we just charge and discharge a battery or whatever, or operate a fuel cell or whatever it is, to thinking about operating these technologies under variability, which is going to be critical as we move to getting realistic pictures about emerging technologies so that we can faster adopt them for these emerging diverse markets. And so that's something that is unclear for a lot of technologies. How do you project for variability? And so that's, I think, something impeding adoption of these new technologies.
Great, definitely. And the safety issues and everything else that goes along with that. Same question I'll give to you, Iryna, if you want to add to it, especially from the perspective of maybe hydrogen being a better option than just batteries.
Well, thank you. I think, well, the question comes where do we have a need for energy storage, right? So if you think at our current scenarios, what do we have in California? We are rich on solar, so the duck curve is there. We have oversupply and curtailment. Some days we can run a grid completely on 100% renewables. And what happens in the nighttime, that's a problem. So how can we shift the load from the day to night? And this is big question, big problem in California, because sure, that's where we need storage, right? That's one of the needs for storage. Another need, what else we can do? We can build offshore wind farms, and in California, offshore wind highest in the evening, so that can help alleviate this kind of supply demand during the daytime. But I think what the biggest problem is the seasonal storage. Since if we are rich in solar in California, in the United States overall, it's more like rich in wind. So in solar, in summer, we have oversupply of power generation, and in winter, we don't have that. So how do we shift how do we store energy in this seasonal type of storage? And that's where batteries are not going to be able to do that, because they're really good and efficient in terms of cost over shorter duration storage. For this type of longer duration storage, we'll need some alternatives, and that's where maybe like geothermal, or this is where hydrogen can be great. And I think before we're going to start looking into this long duration storage, I think short duration storage will need to be solved. And that's where also like this, if you think vehicle to grid connectivity, vehicle to vehicle connectivity, how do we build a smart charging infrastructure to encourage, and what are the policies need to be in place to encourage consumers to charge their electric vehicles during daytime? That's, I just wanted to add this, I guess.
No, that's great. That's great. And that actually kind of brings up a question somewhat to the next question I was going to ask that I'll ask to Jackie and Paulie is, I know most of the focus is on the lithium ion technologies, right, for storage. But to Iryna's point of there's other options out there for storage depending on the application. Are you pursuing, or do you guys even consider pursuing alternatives to even electrochemical, whether it's geothermal or otherwise? I'll throw it to Jackie first to switch it up.
So the answer is yes. I love the idea of long duration storage. And if we can find the right application for the right customer, we would certainly pursue it. And you'll see in California, there is, already procurement going on for long duration storage. As Iryna mentioned, this is a real challenge here. So yes, Ameresco is certainly evaluating new technologies and is more than willing to find the right solution for the right challenge. Lithium ion, though, I will say right now, because of the price point and because of where the market design is, it's definitely something that's an easier fit. And, there's more solicitations for projects that involve lithium ion. So I would say it's here, whereas some of the other technologies are not. They're here, but they're not here in the same way as lithium ion.
That's great. And, I'll say an aside, but it fits, is before I got my PhD, I worked for an ESCO, not an Ameresco, but another one. And one of the things that frustrated me is back then, it was only 20 years ago or so, solar and wind weren't there yet, right? To the same point you're saying, Jackie, now there's a lot of technologies being looked at, but the market's not ready for them. So it gives me hope, because now we would never say that we're not ready for wind and solar. So there's hope and development in a relatively short time.
Yeah, and I think that's another cool thing about Ameresco is that we are willing to take those kind of risks on newer types of technologies. And again, our work in the federal space has given us some, a leg up. So we have, some experience.
Paulie, I don't know if you have anything to add about the idea of newer technologies, considering the focus of your current company, but.
Well, I like what Jackie was talking about at the end about the known aspects of lithium ion. We work with leading debt and equity investors to look for the most bankable, warranted, highest quality supply. And, that's what we're designing for. We're in our sweet spot right now. Technologies and chemistries will change, and we'll be looking to what the market needs for the application. But we're in our sweet spot now.
That's great. Had a couple of questions coming in, and it aligns with another question I had about really the focus of energy storage, not just the technologies, but the applications. And I think this was touched on nicely by everybody, actually. But the question of, I think we were just answering it, should we be considering alternatives for different applications, whether it's long range or otherwise? And the questions that have come up from the audience that kind of build into that is, well, somebody wants to know if we can integrate nuclear more to help with the idea of building the hydrogen economy or the alternatives. And then along those lines, the idea of thinking about this idea of standalone projects versus integration with existing grids and other projects, and how that can inform the technologies that we choose to use or how we choose to approach them. So I don't know, we don't have any nuclear people on the call here, so that's a little hard to answer. But maybe from the other side of it, of the integration with the grid versus the standalone versus the microgrid. Any thoughts on that? Paulie looks like she wants to say something.
I think the question about integrating with renewables, whether it's co-located or hybrid versus standalone, is, look, we need it all. My company specializes in standalone because we can surgically site projects where the grid needs it most. And it allows a lot more flexibility and independence in choosing places to address needs. But there's great projects going on in the universe with co-located or hybrid renewable energy systems. It's just what the market specifically needs and where you can build.
I'd like to shift a little bit to something we've been kind of touching on that I think is really critical, especially at this point in time where we are with all these emerging technologies in these markets. And also adding on top of that, the new administration that we have in Washington, D.C. and their obvious focus and interest in looking into climate change and helping a situation. So with that in mind, Paulie's probably going to jump on this one because I know she's the policy person, but we'll get everybody's opinion. Do you see potential for policy changes that are going to affect energy storage, and where do they need to be and how? I know from my point of view, maybe not policy as much as funding to help move research forward is where I would say. But from the federal level, what can we see in policies that could help this market? And then we do have such a nice contingent from California, which always makes a big splash in terms of helping move federal once they start moving their state policies. So do you see local drivers as well as federal drivers for change? Paulie, I'm going to let you go first because I'm sure you have lots to say.
So I'm going to have a range of answers here. So in December of 2020, the Department of Energy released the Energy Storage Grand Challenge. And if I were to summarize it really very briefly, it's innovate it, make it, deploy it here. And it's a nice compendium of next steps for what you do, policy and otherwise, to deploy energy storage widely across the US. As I said, system prices are coming down. It doesn't pencil out everywhere. We really need a storage investment tax credit. And if you are interested in expanding the value of storage into all the markets, I hope that you would call your federal senator or representative to ask for the storage investment tax credit so that we can make storage deploy ubiquitously where the grid needs it most. So that's going to be in play. And if you think about it, it's a really good time for the investment tax credit to pass. It means that legislators can go home in 2022 as they're looking at campaigns with real shovels, boots out there working, building storage projects. At the federal level as well, you've got an education role the Department of Energy could be playing like it did 15 years ago with the Solar America Initiative, trying to help transfer the knowledge of where storage is in its services and value across the country. Within FERC, there's a lot of work that needs to be done to help properly compensate and recognize the value of energy storage. There's both at FERC and the ISOs, there's a lot of work around resource adequacy and capacity valuation. There's some reforms that need to be made, especially around minimum price offer reforms, interconnection queues that are clogged up, and so on. So there's a lot of work to be done to reform rules towards where the hockey puck is going to be going with these technologies and the services they can provide. And lastly, I think at the state level, trying to get integrated IRPs, the resource planning, to properly value storage, to create long-term contracts with utilities that properly value energy storage. I like the policies that are going into place in certain places like Massachusetts, the Clean Peak Standard, which is again trying to recognize different services that storage can provide and create those additional revenue streams to help close the revenue gap. So why don't I stop there, because I know I just launched a whole bunch of different topics, but open it up to others.
Does anybody want to jump right in, or should I call on somebody?
I'll jump in. Hello. Yeah, so Paulie and I are aligned. We say the same things very frequently. And I guess, yes, I see a big change happening and really crossing my fingers for a standalone storage ITC. I think it's a game changer in the industry. I also commend FERC and the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission. I know Paulie mentioned some of the changes that are happening there, obviously to integrate energy storage into the wholesale market with 841, but we also have 2222. So being that I work for a company that's in the distributed space, that's very, very important as well. Ways to aggregate distributed resources so that they can participate in the wholesale market. Obviously, that's a bit challenging because there's jurisdictional issues when you're starting to aggregate things that are behind a retail meter and putting them with things that are in front of the meter. It kind of gets a little tricky, but I think that's a real opportunity. The distributed arena is where there's going to be a lot of cool changes happening. And then again, emphasizing the states and policy changes at the state level. We're seeing so many of these studies. I know Paulie mentioned the integrated resource plans. That's pivotal to include energy storage and intra-hour considerations of energy storage when you're doing your planning process. So very pivotal. But I also say that there's many states now that are following suit, following what Massachusetts did in with their state of charge report, to determine whether the benefits of energy storage outweigh the costs, and then to develop state incentives and programs, targets, mandates to ensure that we have energy storage as part of the portfolio. So we're seeing more of that happening in more states. And I just think it's a really cool time for energy storage, and the policy is definitely moving in the right direction.
Great, thank you. I'm going to turn it over to the research side because I'm actually excited too about the way things are going, or hopeful. I don't know, Kelsey, what do you think from the research side of things? What kind of changes are we hoping for to help with our research into storage?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question. I think as a researcher, we're always like, more money, right? I have friends who are in the biomedical and bio area, and people are, I think this was a good or a resonating comparison. People are shocked, right, that they're getting a vaccine a year after, a year after being shut down, while you talk to the scientists and they're like, absolutely, if you look at all the money they invested in those vaccines over the last year, the product is proportional to the investment, right? And so I think that is kind of the same logic can be translated into energy storage. Yes, we're still looking for a lot of technologies for different applications. We want, I think batteries for electric vehicles are there. I think they're there. I think there's no reversal in transportation at this point. I think maybe at the large scale vehicles, Iryna would say that there's probably more investments need to be made at that scale. But yeah, I think all around there's a huge need. I think power systems like electricity generation systems is a large area where decarbonization could play a large role in that. I think is going to be thermal energy storage systems. And so if you think about decarbonization of electricity at large centralized power plants, I think that's a open area. As well as integrating high temperature energy sources. But those are kind of two areas that have caught my eye recently as very promising for decarbonization and very nascent technologies that need investment.
Great, thank you. And I'll say to your point about the investment and the timelines, what a lot of people don't realize, and I think we have a lot of people in the industry side of things, is the development of materials is not a fast process. It often takes 5, 10, 20 years to go from an idea to a commercial product. So the more we can get funding to accelerate that, the more likely we would be to be able to get those technologies out. And what is it? Is it all hydrogen economy, Iryna?
Well, no, Emily, you're actually, I wanted to bring up one more point is that we should also think about low-income communities. And for example, we have all this introduction of policies of decarbonization here in California. And there is significant, for example, debate about building new buildings only using electricity to generate heat and power and get rid of natural gas. For example, environmentalists here in California are strong opposing natural gas, but that also has significant, so there will be increase in the price of electricity, and the low-income communities might not benefit from this at all. So we need to really consider those aspects too, to make sure that this decarbonization addresses question of equity of low-income communities. And coming back to the actual questions about technologies, the cost is a problem. The hydrogen cost, if we get down to generate the hydrogen $2 per kilogram, that's our target. And how to achieve that is obviously with having economy of scale will play a role. As we see more demonstration, more implementation projects, that's natural, will reach that goal. And in terms of materials design, we still use some precious metals like iridium in the catalyst. And this is something I'm working on, the whole community working on, to reducing the amount of metal, the precious metal needed in electrolyzers and fuel cells. And so that's kind of where we are with materials. And with the in terms of investment, there is already, I think, the significant investment in hydrogen economy in Europe, and I think it's picking up here in the United States, and we'll see more of this type of deployment projects here.
It's great. Thank you. I'm just scrolling through all these great questions, and thank you to the panelists. Some have been answering them online, which is great. We're almost out of time, so maybe time for one or two more of these kind of panel audience questions before we wrap it up. And actually, this is an interesting one. So Jackie, it's, you know, you're talking about your community microgrids, and there's a question from the audience asking, is this really kind of like a virtual power plant where, you know, Ameresco can perform controls on the distributed energy resources and various loads as they're added? Is that what you're talking about?
Not exactly. So don't get me wrong, the virtual power plant concept and aggregating resources that are all over the place, you know, to combine them and participate as a resource in the market is way cool. So I you know, support that idea. What this is basically a microgrid. So a gathering of distributed resources on one site that is by the substation. So if the substation is to go down, then that set of resources can serve the load for the community. So just like a microgrid that you would have behind a meter, but in this instance, it's in front of the meter. So it can serve load that is, you know, across the street, residential load that, you know, that and commercial load that is in that neighborhood. And so it's not, I wouldn't say it's a virtual power plant. And I think the point that the question was when I was talking about being able to add additional resources. So for example, say that microgrid consists of maybe a gas genset, a solar resource, and a long duration energy storage resource. I'm just mentioning that as a potential combination of resources. What happens if maybe you want to add a tremendous amount of electric vehicle load? Well, in this instance, one wouldn't have to, with the distributed architecture, you wouldn't have to, you know, reconfigure the whole centralized controller. Instead, you basically can plug in another resource into that microgrid, or if you wanted to add another gas genset, or if you wanted to add more solar. So the architecture is such that each distributed resource already has like a controller on it. So, and then it's all brought together into one microgrid solution. So it's pretty cool. I don't know if that helps.
Absolutely, and I agree, it is very cool. I think at this point, I'm gonna try and wrap it up for the day. I think we've had a lot of great questions and a great conversation. Before I close it out though, can I offer each of you, you know, 1 or 2 minutes to give your final thoughts of what you'd like people to take away from this panel and really where the future of energy storage is going? And we'll go around the room where we started with Paulie. I caught her off guard.
I think it's going to be really exciting to see the preliminary use cases for storage being built out over the coming years, and then some new use cases. You know, for example, what we're doing in Hawaii, part of our service in Hawaii is fast frequency response and being able to black start, which helps Hawaiian Electric avoid diesel. It's faster to come online, nearly instantaneous, and so on. And then in the other side of the country, here in New England, you've got our projects. The Cranberry Point project is out near Cranberry Bog, a couple subs away from some incoming offshore wind, the Vineyard and Mayflower wind projects, and so on. And it's close to the Boston load. So it's performing a different type of a service, which is helping integrate ever higher penetrations of renewable energy, and so on. And I think it's going to be very, very exciting to see all the different use cases beginning to be proven in different markets across the country. Where we need help, frankly, is a lot more work on the policy side in very deep, gnarly, difficult subject areas of valuing capacity or valuing risk mitigation or valuing flexibility and so on. So if you're interested in public policy, this is a really fantastic time to get into the mix and designing the market rules for flexible assets that provide a range of great benefits to the community. And again, call your senator and representative and push for the storage ITC, because we really want this to be deployed where the grid needs help most and where it makes most value for the communities. Thanks.
Thank you, Paulie. I'll switch it up. Iryna, you keep going last. I'll let you go second. What are your final thoughts on that future of storage?
All right. Thank you, Emily. And thank you, everybody, for such amazing panel. I learned a lot. So I would say we have to think about short versus long duration storage and which technologies will be appropriate for each. I think batteries will take care of short duration storage. Long duration storage will need alternatives, geothermal hydrogen. In terms of deep decarbonization to reach 100% renewable energy and power generation sector, we'll need a portfolio of energy storage technologies. So it cannot be reached to 100% cannot be reached with batteries only. I think batteries will play a big role, but there will be room for other technologies as well, including hydrogen. I think we will also need to think about utilizing existing infrastructure. Natural gas infrastructure is there. Instead of like shutting it down as environmentalists want to do, let's transform it into renewable or clean natural gas infrastructure. Let's utilize it. Let's use it for hydrogen transportation, for renewable gas transportation, and essentially we also have to think, my final point is about underrepresented communities, and think about how we can transform the grid, decarbonize the grid without kind of including those communities as well. Thank you.
Absolutely. I think it's a great opportunity to think more about equity and equality as we go forward. Jackie, your final thoughts?
Hello. Am I unmuted? Yes, I am unmuted. Hello. So yeah, I think we're going to see gigawatts coming online. This is going to be a really big time in the next several years. California, we have so much under contract already at the grid scale. We're going to see a lot more energy storage, the lithium ion, 4-hour storage to serve peaking needs. We're going to see it probably in, New York, Massachusetts. I do think that storage as transmission is going to be right around the corner as well, so that we can have multiple uses of the storage. I think at the distributed level, we'll see it as a wires alternative as well. So we're going to see more non-wire alternatives for energy storage to serve, as a distribution line, and also providing for, peak periods. I think we're going to see a lot more at the residential level. The price point has come down. I think next we're probably going to see a little bit longer duration, the new technologies, as our colleagues have been talking about. And yeah, I think the hydrogen is just around the corner as well. A little bit further away, but it's all relative. In my career, it's going to happen in my lifetime, in my career lifetime, which really probably isn't that much longer. So that's how soon I'm thinking all this is going to turn around. So we're in the right industry, the right space at the right time. Thank you again for the opportunity.
Thank you. Great perspective. Kelsey, bring it home for us. What's your final thoughts?
Well, my three preceding thoughts were fantastic. I totally agree with everyone. Equity engineering is going to be critical, and something that I think that was definitely undervalued. But just in closing, I think this is a really exciting time. I think we're in a period similar. In my thermodynamics class, we go into a power plant and we see where the coal was a decade ago, and it's natural gas, and that was purely a fiscal move here in Nashville, right? So I think that there's going to be an interesting parallel now, a decade later, in terms of the adoption of energy storage that's going to be visible, and it's very, very exciting. And then just in closing, I think the next horizons of thinking about energy storage is going to be really in that negative emission space. How do we go into deep decarbonization? So beyond a net zero approach, but actually CO2 removal, and that how that space fits into energy storage is kind of an open space right now.
Absolutely. I like that. I like that plug too. That might be another topic we'll have to look into, because you're right. Negative emission sciences, it's growing. And I think it's going to be very interconnected with storage. I don't think it's going to be standalone. Thank you so much. So I just want to end by saying thank you to everyone who joined us today. And thank you to the panelists for being here. I truly enjoyed the conversation and hearing everybody's different perspectives. I think I also learned a lot. I hope everybody else did. And my final closing thought for everybody will be actually to please join us for other seminars like this. We have a couple of upcoming seminars to finish off the spring for our Energy of the Future series. So you can see here on April 23rd, we've got Sustainable African Electricity Sector Expansion. We also have on May 21st, we're looking at can the university restore trust and confidence in the science and experts? And the final one will be June 18th, looking at improving sustainable investing through better ESG metrics. So please join us for all of these. You can go to our website, bu.edu/ISE to register. And again, thank you for coming and enjoy the rest of your day. And thank you panelists so much for your time.
Thanks for the opportunity, Emily. That was great to meet you all.
Hi.
Thank you.
Go BU. Thank you.
Hope you-